So tonight's shir is being sponsored by Mr. Mike Mandelbaum. Le'ilui Nishmas, his mother, Yehudis Shoshana Bas Baruch Olav Hasholem. In connection with her second yahrzeit, she was one of the first victims of the COVID pandemic. She was a woman that lived a life of Avas Torah filled with Avas Yisrael and Avas Eretz Yisrael, and she was zeicha that 10 out of her 11 great-grandchildren are actually living in Eretz Yisrael and realizing her dream. Tehei nishmasa tzrura b'tzror hachayim. So, there's a unique and outstanding halacha that we find in Hilchas Pesach, which is bitul chometz. You know that the Gemara says that mida oiraisa bebitul ba'al mesagi. The Torah says bal yeroeh, bal yemotze, chometz should not be found, should not be seen. B'chol gvulecha. However, one doesn't have to mida oiraisa physically destroy the chometz, as long as he's mavatal the chometz ka'afre da'ara. He considers the chametz like dirt. He's no longer over on the lav of Bal Yiro, Bal Yimotze. According to some Rishonim, bittul is mitam hefker. It's about disowning the chametz, so it's no longer mine. But Rashi holds that bittul chametz is not mitam hefker, as Rishonim point out that hefker normally has to be done in front of 3 people, and over here the halacha is mevatloi beliboy v'dayoy. According to Rashi, it's because the Torah says tashbisu seor mi batechem, and tashbisu, the Torah doesn't use the term tevaru, the Torah uses the term tashbisu, and tashbisu includes also mentally destroying the chametz, and therefore bebitul ba'al masagi. So this is a fascinating halacha that in the Isser Chomer of Chametz, and the Torah clearly says you shall not have Chametz, but nevertheless, if you consider the Chametz to be like Afre Da'ara, it's enough. What's the meaning of this? The Minhag Yisrael is that we say the Haggadah with a sing-song. So the Minhag is in most Jewish homes. And it's kind of interesting because it would seem that it's not the way one tells a story, singing through the story. However, it's mefurish in the Hilchas Seder HaHaggadah of the Ritva. He writes, "V'chayav Adam loymar HaHaggadah b'ne'ima u'bekoil ram kefi koichay." So ne'ima usually means with a tune, bekoil ram. 2 things he says, b'ne'imu b'koil ram. So we need to understand where this comes from. The Mishnah in Pesachim, Daf Kuf Tezayin says, u'maschil bignus u'mesayim b'shevach. V'doresh me'arami oiveit ovi at shegoyme kol ha'parsha kula. Now, it's Yedua in the name of Reb Chaim Brisker that one of the things that define the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is this din of Maschil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shevach. In other words, we have a mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim every day, every night. So what's special and unique about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim on the Leil Pesach? So he says that here we have a special halacha of Maschil Bignus U'Mesayim B'Shevach. You begin with the negative and end with a positive. You begin with a shameful and end with a praise. What's the source for this? From where did the Chazal take this idea that Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim needs to be maschil bignus u'mesayim b'shevach? It's not clear. There's another thing Reb Chaim said about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, that the mitzvah of Sipur is mechayev, that it should be derech she'ela u'tshuva. Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim every day, you just say the story. Whereas You just mentioned that we left Mitzrayim, but on the Leil Pesach, it has to be a question and an answer. Now, this you could say comes from the pasuk Yisholcha bincha machar leimor ma'azois. However, that pasuk al pipshat is not referring to the night of Pesach dafka. So from where do we get that on the night of Pesach, the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim ve'Higadat Levincha is dafka derech she'elo u'tshuva? And also, what's the meaning of the maschil bignus u'mesayim b'shevach? You know, the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Lamed Vav says that it says on the pasuk matzois lechem oini she'oinin olav dvarim harbe. In other words, even though in the literal meaning of lechem oini is the bread of affliction, bread of poverty, but we have a drasha that oini also has the meaning of aniya, and it's a lechem she'oinim olav dvarim harbe. It's a lechem that we talk over it, dvarim harbe. So you see that the Torah is magdir, the sipur of Yetzias Mitzrayim of Leil Pesach, not as dibur, not as amira, not as sipur, but as an aniyah, oinin olav. It's you talking that's why Chazal say that v'doireish me arami oiveid ovi ad she goymer kol parsha kula. Why did they choose the parsha of Arami oiveid ovi to be the text of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? But you see, that parsha is the only parsha in the Torah that the Torah refers to as Aniyah. It says, Va'onisa va'amarta la'Hashem Elokecha Arami oiveid ovi. And since we need to be Mekayim, the oinin olav dvarim harbe, so we use the text that the Torah itself refers to as an Aniyah. But why is the Kriyas HaParsha of Bikurim, this parsha of Arami oiveid ovi, why is it referred to as an Aniyah? So the Ibn Ezra on the pasuk says, Yitochen sheyishalu hakohanim leimor ma zeh biyotcha. He says it's possible that the kohanim, when a yid would bring his bikurim to the mikdash, the kohanim would ask him, "What are you holding in your basket?" And al kain va'anisa. In other words, this is a response to the question that the kohanim are asking, "Ma zeh biyotcha?" So suggests the Ibn Ezra, "Ma zeh biyotcha va'anisa va'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha Arami oiveid ovi." This is a response to that question. So, if the Kriyas HaParsha of Bikurim is referred to as an aliyah, because it really was b'derech she'elo tshuva, it was an answer. So the same is in the lechem she'oinin olav dvarim harbe. Chazal were mesaken that it should be this text of Anisa v'amarta. They were also mesaken that it should be derech she'elo tshuva, because that's what aniyah means. It has to come as an answer to a question. Rashi in Parshas Kisava, he says, "Va'anisa va'amarta, va'anisa l'shoin haramas koil." That va'anisa means that you should say loudly. The Makor Advarim is in the Gemara in Soita Daf Lamed Beis that says the va'anisa va'amarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. We learned that Mikra Bikurim has to be b'koil rom. No, so this is a source for what the Ritva says, that Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim has to be b'koil rom, that you should say the Haggadah b'koil rom, because over here it's also an aniyah, lechem she'oinin olav dvarim harbe. Now there's an interesting Ritva in Makis Daf Yud Ches Amid Aleph who brings in the name of a midrash. We don't have the midrash. Not that I'm such a bucky in the midrash, but in the scholarly edition of the Ritva, the Magia writes on the bottom that we don't have this medrash, so I trust him. But the Ritva brings a medrash that says Va'anisa benigun, that Va'anisa is with a nigun. K'moy vatan lohem Miriam. Just like the vatan lohem Miriam by Shira Sayam is with a nigun. We might have not known that either, but he says that just like the vatan lohem Miriam is with a nigun, hu adin va'anisa va'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha, the mikra haparsha by Bikurim has to be with a nigun. So it says in the Targum Yonis ben Azil on the pasuk vatan lohem Miriam, it says vizamoras lohoin Miriam. So the Targum Yonis ben Azil says that vatan is singing, Rashi in Ezra, Kapitel Gimel, Pasuk Yud Aleph says on the Pasuk, Vayanu Bahalel V'hoidos. Rashi says, Loshen Anias Zemer, Kimoi Vatan Lohem Miriam. In Parshas Chukas, on the Pasuk, Oz Yosher Yisrael Ali Be'er Eni Lo, Enu Lo, the Targum Yonis Ben Uzziel says, Suki Beira, Havoin Mizamrin Lo. So he's saying that the Aniyah is a Zimra. So also in Isaiah, it says, Va'onsa, Shama, B'imei Ne'ureo. The Ibn Ezra says, Va'onsa, Tenagein V'toshir, K'may Vatan Lohem Miriam. So, Vatan Lohem Miriam is Be Negina. And since we say that the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim comes as a Lechem Sha'oinin Olav Dvarim Harbe, and we use the text of Mikra Bikurim, about which the Torah says, so we understand that the Ritva in the Seder HaHaggadah says that we say the Haggadah with a sing song because it needs to be an Aniyah. So we have a source for the Kol Rom, which is the Pashut, the halacha that it says in the Gemara in Soite that V'anisa v'amarto is B'Kol Rom. And we have a source for the niggin, which is what the Ritva brings in the name of a medrash, that the Mikra Bikurim was with a niggin. And both these things we import to the Lechem Sha'oinin Olav Dvarim Harbe, that it needs to be B'Kol Rom and with a niggin. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh, on the Pasuk V'anisa v'amarta, says, the Efsher Shu Loshen Oini. It's a Loshen of Aniyos, of poverty. A lowly person who received a great gift from the king, he makes himself like an oni, lefonov, belev nishbar. In other words, he presents himself to the king as, in other words, showing that really he's a poor man and he deserves nothing, and he's a nothing and a nobody. And that's the v'oni savar marta lefnei Hashem Elokecha. Zok Orach Chaim HaKodesh means that Yachnia Atzmoi Lifnei Hashem V'yoymar Arami Oivei Davi Ki Avinu Hoya Oivei V'toye V'goyle B'Mitzrayim B'Msei Ma'ot. And he concludes U'keneged Ze Omru B'Psachim Maschil Bignos U'Mesayim B'Shevach. So now it comes out that all four things come from the expression that of lechem she'oinin olav. The Gemara darshans lechem she'oinin olav dvarim harbe. So I'm saying that because we have this lechem she'oinin olav dvarim harbe, that's why it's derech she'elo tshuva, which is like the Ibn Ezra says, the aniyah of Bikurim. First of all, that's why we use the text of the Mikra Bikurim. And that's why it's derech she'elo tshuva, because as the Ibn Ezra says that the va'anisa va'amarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha was that the kohanim would ask and you would answer. And that's why it needs to be B'Kol Ram, because the Gemara says in Soite that V'anisa v'amarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha is B'Kol Ram. And that's why it has to be Benegina, because the Medrash says that V'anisa v'amarta of Mikra Bikurim is Benegina. And that's also why it has to be Maschel B'Gnus M'Sayim B'Shevach, as the Orach Chaim says that that's also part of the meaning of V'anisa v'amarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. And since over here it's Lechem She'oinin Olav Dvarim Harbe, it has all these four components. Okay, now they say also in the name of Reb Chaim that one of the things that are unique about the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim on the night of Pesach is that you have to have the matzah in front of you and to explain the taimei ha-mitzvah. That could also be because it's lechem she'oinin olav dvarim harbe. In other words, it's lechem oini. Therefore, the mitzvah is to, with the story, explain what the meaning of these mitzvahs are. Now, the Iker halacha of maschil bignus u'mesayim b'shevach. Why is that? What's the meaning of that? So the Maharsha says in Pesachim that in Yonoi shebiyoyim simchas liboy yizkor tchilas shiflusay ugnusay shaloi tazuach daitay olav. That when you finally made it and you reached the level that you reached, I mean, you shouldn't become haughty and it shouldn't get to your head. B'yom simchas libo yizkor tchilas shiflusoi ugnusoi sheloi tozuach daitoi olav. Yeah, remember your humble origins. Umehai timers of the marsho doiresh nami me'arami oivedovi. Valkein boye loiduye v'leshabuchi tvei. The marsho is really saying two nekudas over here. One is that we mention our humble beginnings in order that it shouldn't get to our head, and the other is because as long as we remember where we're coming from, yeah, the maschil bignus, it makes the Messiah b'shevach all the more powerful because we realize not only where we are, but where we came from and where we are. It lends much more meaning to where we are. However, we might ask in the Seder HaAgoda, the maschil bignus is included in the Magid. So it seems like it's not just a necessary hakdam. It's not just a necessary preface to the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, to the Messiah B'Shevach, but it's part of the Magid. Why is that part of the Magid? Why is that part of the story itself? However, you know that the matzah, as you know, has two sides, not only physically, but the matzah has two sides to it. On one hand, it's the lachma anyod diacholu avasona ba'ard Mitzrayim, as Rishonim say, that this was the bread of affliction that we ate during the years of shibud in Mitzrayim. That's what they fed us. And then it was transformed into the bread of liberation, the bread of Cherus. When we left Mitzrayim, it was lehispik b'tzeikom shel aveiseinu lahachmitz. So, when we reach the point of v'yadatem ki ani Hashem, we now know that kol de'ovid rachmana l'tavov. In other words, now what was perceived as a gnus until now takes on a new meaning and it's part of the story. It's also included in the lefichach anachnu chayovim lahoidos ulahal. As we will explain, how does the gnus become part of the story of Geula, part of the story of redemption? How does the negative become part of the positive story? According to Rav, the haskola b'gnus is mitchila oivdei avoide zora hoyu avoisei. Okay, mitchila oivdei avoide zora hoyu avoisei. It's a spiritual gnus. And, you know, so in the Rambam, in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, the Rambam writes, Kivin shenigmal eison zeh, hischil eshoiteit b'daitoi. V'hu koten. Avram Avinu, right? V'lach shoiv bayoim u'balaylo. He was thinking all the time, v'hoya tomeh, heich efshe sheyiyah hagalgul hazeh noihek tomid v'loyiyah loimanik, u'mi yisavi v'oisei. V'fi sheyefshe sheyisavi v'satzmoi. V'loy hoya loy melamed v'loy moidi adover. Elo mushka b'urkastim bein oivdei avodah zarah hatipshik. V'aviv v'imoy v'chol ha'om oivdim avodah zarah. V'hu hoya oived imoy. He himself worshipped the idols. That's what we say. Mitchila oivdei avodah zarah hoyu avoisein. V'liboy mishoitet u'mevin ad shehisiga emes v'hevin kavat tzedek midaita ha'nechoyna. V'yoda sheyesh sham Eloka echad v'hu manik hagalgol v'hu bora hakol v'chulei v'yoda shekol ha'om toyim. He knew that everybody's making a mistake. V'davar shegoram lahem litos. He also understood why they're making their mistakes. V'chulei kivin shehikir v'yoda hischil hoshiv tshuvois al bnei urkastim v'lases dinimoim v'loy meshe'ein zeh derech emes, and he influenced other people to recognize the Rebbeinu Shalom. Now, the Rambam holds that Avram Avinu was 40 when he was Hikir Esbayra. The Ravid says, no, there's a medrash that says, Ben Sholish Hikir Esbayra. And we learn it from Ekev Asher Shama Avram Bekoili, that Ekev is the Gematria 172, which means that he lived at 175. So when he was 3, he was Hikir Esbayra. So in the Hagoyis Maimuniyos and in the Kesef Mishnah, in the name of the Ramach, they say that there's no stira between the Rambam and the Medrash, because the Rambam is also saying that Misha Nigmal, which is when he was 3, he was Hischil L'shoiteit B'daitoi. He started thinking and contemplating and wondering. They say Shnei Emes Shemigil Sholosh Hischil L'shoiteit B'daitoi V'loy Omad Alo Emes Ad Gil Arboy. That when he was 40, he finally recognized the truth, but he started thinking at the age of 3, and therefore there's no steer between what the Rambam says and what the Medrash says. So you see that, according to what they're saying, it comes out that even the years when he was practically worshiping idols, those years are considered Ekev Asher Shoma Avrom Bekoili. Those years are considered from the 172 years when Avram was hearing, was listening to, was following my voice, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, because the search, the journey is part of the story. And that's what gave him the tools to deal with the mistakes of the Anshi or custom, as the Rambam says that he understood the Davor Shegoram Lehem Litois, and that enabled him to give chuvas. So that in the end of the day, the Haschola Bignus becomes part of the Siyum B'Shevach. It's Ayin Kuf Beis Asher Shoma Avrom Bekoil. So also according to Shmuel, that the Haschola Bignus is Avodim Ayinu L'Pari B'Mitzrayim, in a material sense, the Gnus. But we left Mitzrayim B'Rechosh Godel. And that Rechosh Godel we wouldn't have gotten without that gnus. The Rechush Godel obviously doesn't just mean material Rechush, but it also means a Ruchniistic Rechush. As we know, the Pasuk says in Pashas V'eschanon that Mitzrayim is a Kur HaBarzel, that gold is purified in a Kur HaBarzel, and Klal Yisrael was purified in Mitzrayim. Vayihi Sham L'goy. The Psukim in Yecheskel describe Yetzias Mitzrayim as a birth, meaning that Shibud Mitzrayim was like an ibur. I mean, it's part of what made us who we are, is the Shibud in Mitzrayim. As the Pasuk says, V'yedatem, Ki'atem, V'ahavtem es hager, because Ki'atem yedatem es nefesh hager, Ki gerim hayisim beretz Mitzrayim. So we learned things in Mitzrayim that we wouldn't have learned if we wouldn't have been there. We wouldn't have developed that kind of empathy for the underdog, for the outsider, for the ger, and therefore Mitzrayim gave us a rechush gadol, and therefore the maskal bignus becomes part of the Messiah b'shevach. So the questions and the answers are all part of the maskana. Like we say, she'elas chocham chotzi tshuva. If you have no question, the answer doesn't answer anything. Dafke, when Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan 24 kashas, did they come to the mini umine mistayim shmaitze? So the Meshoitei B'daitoi is part of the Ekev Asher Shoma Avram Bekoili. We wrap the Pesach, the matzah, and the moreh and eat them all together, mitoich the emunah, and the recognition that the gnus and the shevach are part of one shleimus. As the pasuk says that L'osid Lovei, we will say, Oidecha Hashem ki onaftobi. So Golus is full of questions. But when the Geula will come, we will see that all those questions were part of the Messiah b'shevach, and therefore Yetzias Mitzrayim is b'derech she'ela u'tshuva. Because the whole Golus is kedei sheyishalu atinoikis, kedei that we should have the chotzi tshuva, and then we'll be able to reach the total tshuva. That's the secret of a niggin. The beauty of a niggin is the combination of various tones, back and forth, up and down, in and out. The in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadi Gimel on the pasuk Yoidea Nagain, the Gemara says that about David HaMelech, she Yoidea Lishoel, he knew how to be asked questions. The Marshos is Goris Yoidea Lishoel. He knows how to ask questions, to be asked or to ask. But what does that have to do with Niggin? Why do we say that David HaMelech is Yoidea Nagain? because he could be asked questions or because he asks questions. But that's what a niggin is about. A niggin is really about a question and an answer and a question, the back and forth and back. Rashi in Mishlei, Tezayin on the pasuk, Kol Poal Hashem lema'anehu, v'gam Rosha liyoim ro. Rashi says that lema'anehu is a lashon of song, like Enu laHashem besoida. So the Rosha liyoim ro, he exists in order to pose the question to which we can give an answer, and that creates the niggin of question and answer. In any case, the Aniyas Dvorim Harbe that are included in the Gnusan and the Shevach with a sing-song is to show that the question and the answer, the Golus and the Geula, the Afela and the Or Godel all become one. And Mini Uminei Mistayim Shmaitze. You see, Matzah is Lechem Oini. So simply, it's a bread of affliction, a bread of poverty. But we're oinin all of Dvarim Harbe. We reinterpret the matzah. We're oinin all of Dvarim Harbe. We give it a different meaning, which is we have the ability to take even what mitzad atzmo is a bread of affliction and talk it into being something positive. That's the oinin all of Dvarim Harbe. You know that it says in the Zohar that the achilas matzah is a tikkun for the chet eitz hadas. Avada, I have no clue what that means, but the Chet Eitz Hadas really was, Adam Arishan was in Gan Eden, and he had everything, but he felt that he didn't. He felt bitter. The Yisem Kelahim wants to be something else. So you see, you could have it all and be unhappy. Whereas Yidden B'meshech, the long Golus, we say, we feel free and redeemed in spite of all the challenges and the difficulties. That's the tikkun of the Chet Eitz Hadas. So when we take the lechem oini, which simply means a bread of affliction, and we talk it into being a lechem she'oinin all of dvarim harbe, we can make even the lechem oini into a bread of celebration, into a bread of cherus. That's the tikkun of the Chet Eitz Hadas, which was Adam Arishan having everything and feeling like that he's lacking and he's missing. You know, there are 18 days that we are Goymeir Es HaHalel. Halel Sholem. The 8 days of Sukkot, the 8 days of Chanukah, and the first day of Pesach, and the Yom Tov of Shavuos. The other days of Pesach, we don't say Halel Sholem. We say what we refer to as Chotzi Halel. Rish Chodesh, we say also Chotzi Halal, but it could be that Rish Chodesh Pashtus is only a minute. But Mi'ikar Adin, we have Yomim Shegoimrim Behemes HaHalal, and we have the Yomim She'en Goimrim Behemes HaHalal, which is after the first day of Pesach, or in Chutz La'aretz, it's after the second day of Pesach. For the rest of Pesach is Yomim She'en Goimrim Behemes HaHalal. Now, what's the difference between a Halal Sholem and a Chotzi Halal? In Halal Sholem, we say also the capital of Loi Lonu, also the and also the psukim of Ahavti ki Yishma Hashem es koili tachanunai. Masha'enkein in Chotzi Halal, we skip those two things. The emes is that it's there's a lot of confusion legabe what is skipped in the Chotzi Halal. So machlokes rishonim and chilukim and hagim that goes back to very far back to the Tkufas HaGaonim. But the shita and the minig that was neskabel b'chol tfutzas Yisrael is that when we are not goymeir es hahalel, we skip loy lanu and ahavti. So to us, halal sholem is only the halal that includes these psukim, and without that, we don't have a halal sholem. What does that mean? What's in these psukim? You know, in the loy lanu, we talk about loy lanu Hashem, loy lanu ki l'shimcha tein kavod. Al chas t'chal mitzecha lomo yoimru agoyim ayinu Eloheihem ve'Eloheinu b'shamayim kol shechofitzasa atzabeim kesef v'zov masi deyodam, etc., etc. In Ahavti ki yishma Hashem, we talk about afafuni chevlei moves u'mitzorei shoel mitzauni tzora v'yogei nemtza v'shem Hashem ekra ona Hashem malta nafshi. So in these two chapters, we relate also to the negative, to the problems, to the tzoros. I mean, things are actually not that good. We say, the goyim say, Ayino Elohim. We say, Afafuni chevlei moves, mitzuni. So in the other chapters, everything is upbeat, positive, good, etc., etc. We would think that the Hallel, that we don't mention the problems, that's the Hallel Sholem, that's the perfect Hallel. Whereas the Hallel that we do mention the problems, like in the Loilonu and the Ahavti, that's the Chotzi Hallel. I mean, that's the imperfect Hallel. That's the missing Hallel. But the truth is vice versa. The Hallel Sholem is the Hallel where we can incorporate also the difficulties, also the problems, also the negatives, the recognition that it's all part of the story. Maschil Bignus u'Mesayim b'Shevach. Why on Pesach are we only Gomer Sahal the first day? So, the Beis Yosef brings in the name of the Kolbei, in the name of the Medrash Harninu, that on Shvi Shol Pesach we're not Gomer Sahal because Maisei Yodai Toivim Bayam Va'atem Oimrim Shira. And the Beis Yosef says that this is also the reason that we don't say Hallel Sholem during Chalamoid, because we don't want Chalamoid to be more than Shvi Shol Pesach. So we see Al Kol Panim that the reason of Maisei Yodai Toivim Bayam Va'atem Oimrim Shira is only a reason not to say Hallel Sholem. Let's say Hallel, it's okay. What's the pshat? But it could be because if we say that the Hallel Sholem is about incorporating the negative into the positive story, that's something we only do about our problems. But about somebody else's problems, you can't take that approach that it's all good. And therefore, when Masei Yodai Toivim Bayam, so Va'atem Oimrim Shira, you're saying that it's all good. I mean, say that it's all good about your problems, but not about the Masei Yodai Toivim Bayam. But Al Kol Panim, as far as our problems, we should always be saying that the Hallel Sholem is the one that incorporates everything. So it could be that since the Nekuda of Cherus, really, is that one is totally free in all objective circumstances. He could reach subjective freedom, and therefore, even if he has a bread of affliction, he could talk it into being a bread of celebration. So the pshat is that's why, particularly over here, we have this halacha of mevatloi beliboy v'dayoy. In other words, that it's chametz and it's bal yeroah, bal yemotze, but if you consider it dirt, it's non-existent. It only exists in as much as it has a place in your mind and heart. As soon as you get rid of it mentally, it's non-existent. That is really the nekuda of cherus. Okay, Rabbi Isai, I think that'll be enough for now.